climate and outlook for July. Obviously, it's 2021. Today, we're going to have Pete Boulay, from the State Climate Office in Minnesota, give us our briefing. We're actually going to follow that up with a very short sort of ag climate 5 or 10 minute talk by Brad Rippey from USDA. He's going to talk about a little more in depth about some of the crops that have really been hit hard further north and west in this region. Then we'll take questions throughout the whole thing. So if you have comments or questions, feel free to type them in the question box, and we'll get to those at the end. Sometimes we can get to them while we're actually talking. So again, this is Doug Cluck from NOAA, and we have Dennis Toddy also from USDA on. He will be helping to answer questions as well as we go through this discussion. So why don't I just turn it over to you, Pete?
Okay. Thanks.
There
thanks,
you are.
Doug.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
So starting out here, taking a look at what's going on in the north central region. This picture I have here of the corn didn't look so good a month ago. I have to report that it looks much better now with a little bit of timely rains, and that's kind of the message of today's outlook is in the corn and soybean areas, timely rains have mattered quite a bit. However, there is some drought concerns, and we'll be talking about that too as we go along. So go to the next slide. It's a little general information. Many thanks going out to all our collaborators out there and partners. If you want to learn any more about anything I talk about today, any of these links or any of these websites here have much more information than I have, and there's lots of updates that go on constantly, so always refresh as needed. So a little bit of an outline here. We go over the recent conditions, the temperature and precipitation ranks over the past 30 days, looking at June, and then the spring as well. Also looking at the soil moisture situation, and of course we'll have a bit on the drought as well. Then go into some impacts. What is the effect on our weather of the past 30 days or so? And then, of course, the outlooks. Let's take a peek in the future, a little bit on ENSO, and then, of course, the short term, and then a little bit of a peek into the longer term. And that picture on the right, grasshopper damage to barley in Montana. Grasshoppers have been an issue where the drought is the most severe. North and South Dakota has also had issues with grasshoppers. So recent conditions, this is a fire that had just started in the boundary waters of Minnesota caused by lightning. Actually, the 5 fires were started by lightning in northern Minnesota with the dry conditions, and that's fire's been a prevalent concern. We've had smoke in the skies all throughout the the northern states. So that's been one issue too, is kind of with this summer, the bit of a smoke and haze and fire danger as well. I'm looking at the spring, April through June, temperature ranks. June was the warmest month on record for the whole country. You put the whole spring together, and it was above average for many states, near average across kind of the central, and as you went farther south, actually cooler, below average. Kentucky in our region was the only state that actually wound up below average for temperature, but in general, it's a very warm spring. June, warmest June on record for the whole country, although that's heavily weighted to the southwest and the northeast. Up here in the north was much above average, with just above average from basically Kansas through Ohio, and near average for Kentucky. Precipitation, it was dry. Not only was it warm, it was dry for many areas, with a few exceptions. It was top 10 driest spring in Minnesota and South Dakota and Montana. Missouri happened to be above average for precipitation April through June. June in particular is fairly wet in Missouri, and a lot of places just near average in kind of the Great Lakes region. June by itself shows where it was the wettest, basically Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, average, much above average in some places. And Michigan stood out as being the wettest of the bunch, much above average. And on the flip side, not that far away, really, by as the crow flies, South Dakota had its driest June on record. So quite a dividing line between the haves and have-nots, and I'll have some more maps that'll kind of show that where the dividing line really is. So here's wet versus dry. There's the big line there showing the kind of inflection of who's experiencing kind of an average to even a little bit above average precipitation summer, and a drier to much drier than the average summer as well so far. And actually, this doesn't even include what happened yesterday on the 14th. Quite a storm complex swept across northern and central Iowa into parts of Wisconsin and a little bit in northern Illinois. So that kind of helped out that little sector that was below normal there. So adding a little bit more precip, even in the southern tier counties of Minnesota, got some welcome precip as well. Also, to go along with the precipitation, it was relatively cool, normal or just a little bit below normal since the middle of June, across basically from southeast Kansas through Missouri, Illinois, into eastern Wisconsin, and especially Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. And warmer as you go farther northwest towards Montana, much above normal temperatures to start out the summer. So what's really changed a lot in the past month is the soil moisture. Looking at the calculated soil moisture percentiles, those dark reds show where it's the driest. And what's happened up in the far north is that evaporation has also been excessively high, along with getting no precipitation. I run an evaporation pan at the St. Paul campus at the University of Minnesota, and my June evaporation was the highest I've seen since June, for a June month since 1988. So it kind of gives some insight on how much water we're losing off the landscape. And in particular, the top 2 feet of the soil too. Believe it or not, the deep soil still has moisture in it in Minnesota and other places too, because of the wet 2019. As you went farther south and west, that deep soil moisture isn't quite there like we have up in the farther north. So it's not the same everywhere you go. Just looking at the topsoil moisture, in general, we've been losing moisture in the topsoil up in the north. The driest spots, Montana. We've improved a little bit too with some places like in Kansas and also Illinois have improved a little bit for topsoil moisture, but in all, we're still kind of a little bit behind. Missouri is doing very well, not too short there at all right now at the moment. So the interesting part is the corn conditions are doing quite well. Brad is going to talk about wheat, and there'll be more details there. That's a different story. But for the main message with corn and also soybeans is that we've had some timely rains when it mattered the most. Iowa, even southern Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Nebraska, Kansas, all those places have seen rains right when you need it the most. The driest spots are kind of outside the Corn Belt in Minnesota as you go farther north, in North Dakota and also South Dakota as well. But not doing too bad. Certainly this is not 2012. I took a look at 2012 conditions, and for instance, I'll go back one for corn, it was the 25th percentile for the country. And at the bottom there, you can see that good to excellent, we're at 65%. So a big difference from 2012. And soybeans, similar picture, virtually unchanged from last week at about 59% good to excellent. So looking at the drought monitor for the past 2 months, kind of seeing the ebb and flow of drought. Basically, the drought has kind of shifted to the east a bit. There was quite an epicenter there back in May of extreme drought in North Dakota into eastern Montana and a little bit in the South Dakota. And what's changed is the drought's kind of expanded eastward, but has improved a little bit in North Dakota with some rains, and also Montana as well. Kind of the big picture is the class change in the last 8 weeks. We've had 2 to even up to 3 class degradation in Minnesota, even in other parts too, where the droughts got worse. The biggest story on the improvement is on the Michigan side, where they've seen some improvement, a 2-class improvement, even 3-class improvement in Michigan. So that's quite a turnaround from where they were sitting before. And South Dakota, one end has gotten worse, and the other on the western side got a little bit better. So basically a little bit of change here and there. Colorado too has improved in the eastern part of the state, held its own, and decreased just a little bit in the west. I'll mention a little bit about rivers and streams. This is becoming an increasingly issue with low water levels. This is just a little snapshot of the St. Croix River on the border of Minnesota and Wisconsin. And lots of exposed bed. And one thing we're concerned about is how low the streams are getting. This is the 28-day average stream flow compared to historical stream flow. Lots of much below normal, below the 10th percentile. In Minnesota, we have streams that are in the 5th percentile. North Dakota as well. Even in Iowa, a little bit, I think it's the Raccoon River that's still having some lower flows. And then it completely changes over, flips over to above normal to much above normal, northern Missouri going right through Illinois into Michigan, and also in Indiana and Ohio too, where there's a surplus of moisture on the landscape. This is a very busy image here, but there was one couple things to point out in the Missouri River Basin update. On the upper right there, they have this nice little arrow that says "We are here." It just kind of shows how much lower the situation is, and I even circled this. Basically, the upper basin annual runoff forecast, if it's realized at what they're saying there, it would be the 10th lowest runoff since 1898. So that's a pretty long period of record. So a little bit lower with available water in the upper Missouri, and also in the Mississippi too. I have a little bit about that. The Mississippi River at Brooklyn Park, we have 90 years of record there, and it's at the 4th percentile ranking for the date. So that's the 4th percentile ranking for basically June or July 15th. So dealing with some lower water issues that we haven't seen in a while around here. Going through some state impacts, kind of basically from Colorado through Minnesota. We've had some great sunsets due to those smoky skies, creating some haze. There's been smoke from out west and also from some fires up in Canada too, kind of giving us that kind of the hazy sky situation. We'll start where it's the greenest, Kentucky and Ohio. Everything's good in the Ohio Valley. You can see in the map there in the lower right, plenty of precipitation. That's the percent of mean precipitation for the past month, and about 200% of normal across a good swath of everywhere from basically Missouri through Illinois and even into Kentucky and Ohio. A little bit, Ohio's not quite as wet, but plenty of green grass out there, and the temperatures haven't been too bad either. So it's kind of the garden area of our region right now. Michigan, quite a turnaround. They went from quite dry to now wet over the past 30 days, and temperatures have been near normal. And the algae bloom predictions are about smaller than the average on Lake Erie. So, the less heat is probably helping that out a little bit too. So they're probably happy to get return to precipitation, easing the drought situation in Michigan. Illinois, it's been active. They had a flooding rain event near Bloomington, Normal, Illinois. There's a picture of kind of damage to Interstate 55 due to the flood, and that was back in June. And then also there's been some tornadoes too. An EF3 tornado in western suburbs of Chicago caused damage as well. So with these storms, there's been rain in some places, a little bit too much rain, but in general, there's been some adequate moisture in Illinois. Iowa and Missouri, The first 16 days of June in Iowa was some of the driest and warmest June on record. So it really went into June with a lot of worry. And then it became an active storm season. Just one example, there was 12 tornadoes yesterday, on July 14th, with the large storm complex that swept across. And you know what? Crops are doing very well, except where there's hail. And where it's too wet. So there's been some issues. If you were unfortunate and got the hail, that damaged corn and soybeans, and in some places of the state, I think it's southeastern part of the state, it's too wet. So like to actually see some drier weather in a few places. Minnesota, we had our third warmest, seventh driest June on record. The top 2 feet of soil are beginning to dry out. For basically south of the Twin Cities to the Iowa border, we've had some beneficial rains on July 6th and 7th, and then again yesterday. And the timing has been perfect, about an inch of rain or so for each event. And that's exactly what they needed to help out the crop situation down there. So especially along Interstate 90, has probably been helped out the most with the timely rains. However, very little, if no rain, has fell basically north of St. Cloud, the central and northern part of the state. In North Dakota, it gets even hotter and drier. The drought continues. It's been hot and dry. Algal blooms are becoming an issue. Livestock ponds, there's been some problems there too. Feed and water is scarce, and the pastures are in poor shape. Stress crops and also grasshoppers. One thing I didn't add is Devil's Lake continues to fall, and I think is about 6.5 feet lower than its record level, and continues to fall as the dry weather continues this summer. And I threw in a picture there of something I've never heard of before, a blister beetle. They're toxic to I guess cattle that eats them. So it's definitely something you don't want to see. And that's been on alfalfa. And thanks to Adnan for showing that to me too. Kansas and Nebraska, currently things look pretty good crop-wise. There is some deep soil moisture concerns. So it's vital that they still get the timely summer rains to keep up the moisture in the crops that are going on now. There was a large thunderstorm complex that swept across Nebraska on July 10th, caused a lot of power outages in Omaha and damage to irrigators across the state. They're still trying to assess the damage with that. So in Kansas, crops are looking good. There was some hot weather and some hail events too, but in general, producers are fairly happy in Kansas. In the rainfall, it's been sporadic, but in general, higher than for places farther north. In Colorado, the heat hit the state there, had the earliest 100-degree reading at Colorado Springs on June 16th. Also, the all-time record high at Grand Junction of 107 on July 9th. And some heavy rains fell on the Grizzly Creek Fireburn Scar on June 27th that caused a mudslide across I-70. That's the picture down below there. So fires that had occurred in the past, the landscape's exposed and very susceptible to mudslides if the heavy rains come. So that's one after effect from fire that's happened in the past. We'll go over a little bit climate outlooks going over the next 7 days, 8 to 14 day, and look in the tea leaves for August and looking into the fall and see what happens. Looking ahead the next 7 days, that almost looks like the pattern of the maps I've already shown. Those who have gotten precip in the past look like they'll still continue to get precipitation, namely from basically Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. That's the area that'll see probably at least normal or above normal precipitation over the next 7 days. Basically, the northern half of Iowa and all Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, very little precip to be had in the next 7 days. Now, the 18-14 day outlook that takes us the 22nd through 28th of July shows a very confident at above normal temperatures. And actually, we have an excessive heat. I'm trying to think of the phrasing. Excessive heat outlook was highlighted for the 22nd, 23rd, for the northern tier states as well. Precipitation also pegged to be below normal for the next or the 8 to 14 day outlook too.
Yeah, that.
Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Pete, I'm just going to say it's a hazard outlook that
Hazard
the Weather Service puts out, looking at week 2 in this case. So what you just said is correct. You didn't depict it, but it basically shows an area across the northern plains where they don't need to be super hot is going to be most likely over the next week 2, not this week, but week 2. So
okay,
anyway.
Thanks, Doug. Looking to August, pretty much the same story. Stays above normal, at least a tendency for above normal in the north with equal chances, Kansas through Indiana. For temperature precipitation, it's basically a 3-sided coin for many places, equal chances, but a little bit of above normal tilt in Ohio, below normal tilt in the Dakotas and Montana, and a little bit in Colorado and Wyoming too. This is looking at August through October, and pretty much the same story. Above normal tendencies across much of the area, except perhaps parts of Missouri, eastern Kansas, and precipitation below normal for the majority of folks in the north and the west, and equal chances for states in the east. Also looking at the autumn, the entire country is now poised to have a tendency for above normal temperatures, except a tiny little spot there up in Alaska. And the dry conditions, at least the tendency for it, looks like it may continue also right through the fall months. The seasonal drought outlook is interesting, showing a lot of persisting drought where it's in already, with some development likely in Nebraska, a little bit of Colorado, and appears to see some improvement in northeast Iowa. They probably have already seen it with the rains that fell over the last 24 hours already in southern Wisconsin, maybe even a little bit in southeast Minnesota too, where the rains were the heaviest. But definitely keeping an eye on the drought as the weeks go on. We're currently under a La Niña advisory. Basically what that means is we have a greater than 50% chance of development. Right now it looks like a weak to a moderate event, and this will be brought up in future webinars for developments and repercussions of ENSO going forward. So basically the summary for the outlook, the drought will persist over the north, possibly some improvement over Iowa and Wisconsin. And it really does look like above normal temperatures will continue through the autumn for most places, and also a tendency for below normal precipitation to persist into the autumn. So lots of information here. You could get further information on anything that was discussed today from our partners. And I don't know if we'll take questions now, but we'll also have Brad talk a little more about agricultural impacts too.
Yeah, just to highlight a couple things on this page. That's Pete at the top. If you have any questions for him, he's the one who gave you the presentation, so you can blame it all on him. And then Dennis is also on this call, and then I am the third one down, and Mike, Timlin, Natalie, and Brian. Can you go back up one slide, please? Yeah, and the top 2 websites. Well, we might need to fix the bottom one, but the top one there will take you to the webinars, the recordings, and if you still can't find them, you can always contact me at any time, and I'll make sure you do. There goes Crystal, is just putting it into the yeah. So we'll get that out in just a minute. Before we go to Brad, I just want to say a couple more things about some impacts in terms of navigation. There may be some, it's good that we're having, in fact, it's raining in Kansas City as we speak, but it's good that we're having lower basin precipitation, because the upper basin, in the Missouri basin anyway, is very dry, as Pete was pointing out. They're still going to have a full navigation season, but there may be some slight river navigation, barge travel stuff, some slight changes in terms of how much they can carry. The other thing was there were some concerns for low water. I remember they were in maybe the Quad Cities and maybe north of there on the Mississippi in terms of energy production. And it had to do with the heat of the water and the low water issues. That may or may not be solved with some of the precipitation, again, that we've been seeing very lately. Lastly, it's a La Niña watch so far. So we haven't gone to the advisory stage, and it's sort of a ramping up from La Niña watch to La Niña advisory, so kind of an internal thing, but it's not as serious yet. It's more of just, you know, it hasn't happened. Once it sort of gets to the point of happening, we cross a threshold, in other words, we'll go into the watch category or go into the advisory category. And now, thank you for that. I'm going to change here to Brad so he can give his spiel. You got that, Brad?
All right. Yep, I'm on, and you should be seeing my screen here in a second, if not already.
Yep, it's in full mode. Yep, go ahead. Take it away, Brad. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you to Pete for the presentation and the setup. And thanks to the 200 plus of you who are on today listening to this. And I guess in a way I get to be the bearer of bad news today because there's a lot happening every single day on the agricultural front across these drought affected areas across the north and the western fringes of this region. And so for that reason, I'm going to take a special look at agriculture today, a little bit of a deeper dive. I've only got 10 slides, so it won't be too long. But just to focus in, there was a key USDA report came out this week showing some real world evidence of some of the impacts. So I want to start off with looking at some of these commodities and crops in drought, starting in the upper left with barley, currently seeing, well, first of all, the dark green are the major production areas, light green are the minor production areas, and then you've got the drought areas in the hatched red from the drought monitor. So looking at the barley, upper left, 80% of the US barley production area currently in drought based on the latest today's US Drought Monitor update. Even worse, as you go to durum wheat, that's a relatively small portion of the spring wheat crop, but it is primarily grown in North Montana, Western North Dakota, 95% of that production area in drought. And then spring wheat, it's a big crop. It's a significant crop grown all across the Northwest and North Central United States, 98% of the production area in drought. And then from a livestock standpoint, really big impacts on hay production. And if you focus in on one of the big specialties across the northern and western US, that's alfalfa hay, which Pete had a picture of earlier being ravaged by grasshoppers. If you look just at the alfalfa hay, almost 2/3 of the US production area currently in drought. So there are unfortunately real world impacts unfolding day by day on all of these crops and more. This is the USDA report I referenced a moment ago. The US crop production report came out on July 12th with some truly sobering numbers on some of these US crops. I'll talk about more on winter wheat in a moment because a lot of the production comes from areas from Kansas southward. But there are some big regional and local impacts with winter wheat production. More specifically, I'll start with looking at the durum wheat crop. That is the smaller portion of that spring planted crop. You're seeing yield down 38% from last year, and due to a smaller planted area, production is down an incredible 46% from last year. The bigger portion of that spring wheat crop, what's known as other spring wheat, down on the yield 37% from 2020, production down 41%. So in other words, this drought, and this is the first field survey based estimate of the season coming out of USDA, it effectively shows that more than 1/3 of all spring wheat crops were wiped out by this drought. Also in the report, but not highlighted, barley production down 31% from last year, The yield down 28%. There's the numbers on that in terms of bushels per acre, and also some impact on oat production, some of which comes out of the north. Production down 37%. A lot of that was area reduction, but the yield was down 12% from 2020. Now here's sort of a quick synopsis of some of those real-time unfolding day-by-day impacts happening across the northern plains and upper Midwest. As I mentioned, primary impacted crops: winter wheat, spring wheat, durum wheat, barley and oats, and of course rangeland and pastures, just to name a few of the major ones. That July 12th crop production report shows that the US spring wheat crop, the yield estimated to be the lowest in 19 years, since 2002, time of another big western and high plains drought. The US durum wheat, and this is truly incredible to me. I started my federal career in 1988, the year of the big drought. There were carryover impacts to the following year. US durum wheat yield is estimated to be the lowest since 1989. And within a time where we see increasing yields on the trend lines over time, that's really amazing to see the lowest yield in 32 years. Also, from a livestock standpoint, can't emphasize enough that there are really some serious hay shortages and feed shortages in some of these hardest hit D2, D3, and D4 areas across the northern plains and the west. Producers intend to harvest 51.5 million acres of all hay in 2021. It's only down 1% from 2020 because we're kind of counterbalancing the good in the south and east with bad in the north and west. But that even that 1% reduction, if realized, would be the lowest total hay harvested area in the United States in well over a century, since 1907. That decrease, according to USDA, is primarily due to drought across the northern Great Plains. A couple of highlight charts from that USDA report, or the briefing that followed it, I should say, showing here's the winter wheat impact. Now, it's really interesting here again, all of Pete's lines showing the haves and the have-nots. It really is playing out in real-time agriculture here. Just 1 month change. So we get our first winter wheat estimate in May. There's updates in June and July and going forward from here. But just look at this 1 month change in yield potential for Montana and the Dakotas. We saw 15 to 20% declines just in the last month, showing the impact of not only some of those late freezes that we had into May, late May, along with the impacts of the drought. Huge drop in that winter wheat crop potential, again, for Montana and the Dakotas. But at the same time, look at the strip from Kansas to Ohio and Kentucky. We saw increases in yield potential in that time. In fact, we're looking at record yields this year if these numbers are realized in states like Missouri, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Kentucky. Now here's getting to the really serious stuff. The durum wheat crop, again, this is mostly northern Montana, western North Dakota. 25.8 bushels per acre is the 2021 preliminary estimate, the first field-based survey for this year. That could change. It could go higher, it could go lower, but at this point, if that's realized, that would be down 37% from last year, the lowest yield since way back in the late 80s. And if you want to kind of relive the bad history of 88, 89, there was the yields in the box there, in the inset box, 15.7 bushels per acre in 88. That was down 44% from the previous year. And then still a tough year at 89 as we recovered from that 88 drought. They're truly remarkable numbers, seeing that. And the performance was actually a little worse percentage-wise in that change from 2016 to 2017. The durum wheat belt got hit hard by the 2017 drought as well. But truly remarkable numbers looking, and the trend line's on there. So you can see that over time, the trend has increased some. And then the durum wheat numbers, just 22 bushels an acre in the two big states, Montana, North Dakota, both those numbers down 44% from last year. Other spring wheat, which is everything else besides durum wheat that is planted in the spring. I think in a way this is even more remarkable because of the size of the crop. It's many times larger than the durum wheat crop. current number coming in at 30.7 bushels per acre. Again, that will be adjusted in future months. That's just a preliminary estimate. The crop's still in the field at this moment. But that would be the biggest percentage decline, down 38% from last year, year-over-year decline since 1987-88, when we saw down 42% during that cycle. So really an amazingly bad number for other spring wheat. And here's the numbers. There's your 6 major production states, the 4 of which we're interested in this region. And those numbers down anywhere from 20 to almost 50% from last year in terms of yields. And I'll just finish up with this. We've talked a lot about grasses and rangeland and pastures and lack of feed. And these are the latest numbers from USDA NASS on the very poor ratings as of July 11th. And as Pete said, things are looking pretty good in the south and east part of this region. But as you get into the Dakotas and Montana, it's a dire situation. Even if rain comes now, it's too late to grow grass this year. So the impacts will last on through the fall, winter, and into next spring. It's going to be a slow recovery in the hardest hit areas. We've seen that problem area kind of bleeding a bit to the east and south into Minnesota and northern Iowa, places like that. So this is going to be an ongoing impact. We're outside of that key springtime when we get the rains that make the grass grow, and we're likely to go many more months with feed shortages, hay shortages in some of these hardest hit areas. And with that, I'll turn control back over to Doug, and I guess we can take any questions.
All right. Thank you, Brad. So we have several questions and a couple comments that could help. Going back to, I'll just leave your slides up for now, Brad, for the moment. The blister beetle issue, and apparently, and this comes from Amanda Bachman, so I want to give her full credit because I certainly didn't know any of this. Blister beetles are a big problem for alfalfa. Being hayed for horses, horses are extremely sensitive to the cantharidin, which is a toxin released by the beetles, and they've also seen blister beetles issues in towns, home gardens. They like to defoliate legumes of all sorts, so beware on your legumes. And then someone's making a comment here that isn't the 30-day SOI reading showing the La Nina reading above 8 already, and I didn't. I'm not sure about that. I think I'd have to know a little more about the context. I'm not sure what 8 means. If it's 8 degrees, that's one thing.
No,
and
Doug,
that'd be really.
Doug,
yeah, go ahead.
Doug, I can take that one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because it's derived from actually some of my PhD at
Great.
Iowa State. It's using the Southern Oscillation and Southern Oscillation Index. That if it's outside the 0.8, either plus or minus, puts you in El Nino or La Nina category for some period of time. So it is one measure of El Nino, La Nina, but it's probably not as robust as some of the more comprehensive ones that are used here.
Yeah, no, let's expand a little bit, since we're starting on La Nina now. A little bit more about how common or uncommon La Nina is. We won't go into great depth on this particular call, but 2 La Ninas in a row or 2 winters with La Nina activity or signs in the equator aren't that unusual. It does tend to happen fairly often that you have back-to-back years of La Nina. Some people, a lot of people attribute a lot of things to that, and I'm not sure we can in North America. We saw last year wasn't a typical La Nina year in terms of when it was supposed to get cold, and that the northern plains, for example, were supposed to be perhaps wetter and cooler than normal. That wasn't the case. Yeah, we had some cold weather in February, but that was very short term. Anything anybody else wants to say about double dip? We call them double dip, La Nina years that follow each other. Okay. Yeah, it's still a watch, so it's not 100% chance, 100% that it's going to happen. We'll leave that out there too. How critical are temperatures the next 2 weeks for corn pollination?
I can take that, Doug. This is Brad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Sure.
mean it's showtime. Corn is entering reproduction as we speak, and so the outlook for the heart of the Midwest actually looks pretty good for the next 2 weeks. But there's going to be some excessive heat once you move into the northwestern fringe of the Corn Belt, meaning mainly North Dakota. So that's something to watch, but that's a pretty small percentage. But yeah, it's really coming into showtime for corn. It's going to be moving through that window of reproduction for the rest of July.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about week 2 here in terms of being above normal temperatures from both Dakotas, Minnesota for sure, and then west into Montana and such in terms of what we consider hazard area, which means much above normal, not just above, but much above normal. So we are talking 90, 95, over 100 in some places in those cases.
Yeah, we often use
and
around 95 degrees Fahrenheit as kind of a critical point for corn at that stage. Although if it's dry, slightly lower temperatures can be a concern.
And as you saw, the soil moisture from what Pete showed, the soil moisture is rather short in that area. So even less extreme temperatures, even low 90s, will be causing some problems. That's why this recent precipitation has been helpful in some of the areas a little bit further south, so they can handle a little bit more temperature at this point. But Brad's right on. We're hitting that time when we can kill a crop or manage to get it through.
Yeah. Do you see the hazards map up?
Yes.
Okay, good. So that's the week 2 hazards map it's going to be updated, I think, later today. Yeah, a little later today. But this is from yesterday. That whole area that we just described is sort of under the gun for next week in terms of what we call excessive heat. All right, keeping going down here. Yeah, one mentioned that we do advertise, the regional climate centers do host these recordings and the PDF of the files or presentations that people give. They're also on YouTube, but the YouTube address changes each time we put it out. But you can go and search for, or put, you can go search for North Central Climate and Drought Outlooks if you want to watch it that way. And how much rain, I don't know how to answer this exactly. I gave an answer, but how much rain per week would be needed to moderate drought conditions? And I'm going to say right off the top, Jerry, that it depends on where you are, right? So if it's D4, that's one thing. If it's D1, not as bad, is quite another. But Dennis or Brad or Pete, anybody want to talk about how much rain would be needed to moderate drought conditions? And there's also a temporal aspect to this, short term for crops, then long term for deep soil moisture recharge. Two different answers.
This is Pete. At least in Minnesota, I always say at least an inch a week is what the normal is for summer here. So at least normal. You don't necessarily have to get a surplus every week, but just maintaining normal would help. But then the big caveat is then the evaporation can't be that high either. So it kind of goes together. Cooler temperatures is an assist to normal precipitation.
The other
Anything
thing
else
along
on?
with that,
Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing along with that is that's the climatological average, but weekly ET or evapotranspiration, how much water the crop is using out of the soil, is probably going to be more than that. So even at average precipitation this time of year, you're losing ground in the way of soil moisture. So if you have some soil moisture to work with, great, you can get through that. But if you have very limited soil moisture, even that inch of rain in a week probably, eases some of the stress. It probably does not meet all the needs of the crop. Okay,
and then what are the expectations for corn and soybean yields in Minnesota, South Dakota, and North Dakota? Brad?
Yeah, we've got to kind of tiptoe around that, but you know, we know we know the first field survey numbers from USDA and NAS will come out in the August lockup report. So
Okay.
that'll be the first key number, I think, the next key number coming out from USDA. That said, we know we do have serious problems in parts of the Dakotas, much of the Dakotas, and parts of Minnesota at this point. So it's a little early to know. I mean, we just have this crop heading into reproduction now, but we know the forecast is not all that particularly favorable for the same areas that are hurting. So you have to, again, it's a tightrope to walk this time of year, but you're going to have probably lower yielding corn and likely soybeans unless something really changes in the next few weeks in that upper Midwestern corner of the Corn Belt.
Corn Belt, yeah. Okay, still moving on. Temperatures greater than 95 with low relative humidity will desiccate exposed silks, but not impact silk elongation rates greatly. Pollen is no longer viable once temperatures reach the mid-90s or greater, especially with low relative humidity. And that I did not make that up. That's David Smith, who knows a lot more than I do. Corn uses about 0.3 inches per day around tasseling time. Another person comments, and Glenn Meyer comments, question is there data on how these extreme temperatures and lower precipitation is affecting groundwater resources? There is data out there, and we didn't include it, I apologize, but we could consider doing that in the future from the USGS folks. They tend to monitor groundwater pretty well, no pun intended. Anybody else want to comment on groundwater?
I'll pass on that one.
All right. How long can corn and soybeans withstand temperatures above 90 degrees? What about other crops like canola, barley, and spring wheat? Well, let's go to that second part first, Brad, in terms of, is it over for those crops, canola, barley, spring wheat? Are we done for the year?
It's getting close. Some of the crop development has been accelerated by heat and drought, of course, at the expense of yield potential. So the crop will likely be harvested earlier than normal. Harvest should begin in the next couple of weeks, I suspect, for some of the most toasted part of the crop. It's going to be tough I mean, knowing what we've got coming the next 2 weeks, I don't think anything's going to turn around for your barleys, your spring wheats, your durum wheats. So I think that's pretty much what you're seeing in that July report is unfortunately probably pretty close to the final answer there.
Okay.
There was part one to that too. I can't remember what it was though.
The part one is how long can corn and soybeans withstand temperatures above 90, and I think it's two different answers, right?
It is. You know, corn has a pretty narrow window of reproduction, but soybeans can rebloom and repod. So there is a much longer opportunity. Dennis always talks about this, but you can have late recovery in soybeans. Obviously in the Dakotas, we don't want to go too much further with this hot, dry weather, but there still could be some opportunity for recovery even into August with soybeans, if favorable conditions return.
And Diane, I think I'm going to have to answer your question one-on-one. So let's see. As of today, groundwater in South Dakota has not recovered with recent precip. That's a Laura Edwards comment. And she also comments that the Weather Service in Sioux Falls about their groundwater, that area, have also seen no response, okay, to surface water, you know, rivers and streams going up with the rains that they've had, and substantial rains that they've had lately, actually. So a lot of it's going down into the soil, which is good, or being used immediately. So, and groundwater data can help illustrate preferential demand for irrigation and cost trends for irrigation and irrigated crops. Thank you, David. And that is the end of our questions. Any other comments or anything else anybody would like to say? I guess the only thing I'll put in here is if we continue to see great degradation, well, let me rephrase it. If we continue to see drought conditions the way they are and the excessive heat issues beyond this next week and even beyond that, we may do another quote unquote special webinar on July 29th. Some people are going to be out of town, but we're going to try and pull it off anyway if there's a need for that. So we'll try and get that advertised if needed. And then I'll go back to you, Dennis, Brad, and Pete. Anything else in particular you'd like to add to this conversation now?
Montana's up next month.
Yes, our friends from Montana Climate Office are going to give us the Montana news, which I'm sure is going to be well as the rest of the region. But it'll be interesting listening to them and their issues there. Thank you very much, everyone. Again, especially Brad, Pete, and Dennis for your help on these things. Very helpful. Thank you all, and hope to see you all next month in August, if not before. Take care.